Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight we enter a forgotten corner of California where the silence is not empty, but haunted. The Bodie Bijou, a decrepit movie theater in a real-life ghost town, hides more than just dust and memories. It holds an audience that never left. Leo Maxwell didn't come to Bodie for fame. He came to forget. But instead, he found a cursed cinema, a ghost pianist bound to a screen, and 3 rules that keep the restless dead from taking their final bow. This is no ordinary horror story. This one burns slow, seeps into your skin, and ends with a twist so disturbing, you'll question whether you ever really leave a theater when the credits roll. So, don't skip ahead. Watch until the end, and if your screen flickers strangely while watching, don't panic. It's probably just the Projectionist checking in. If this story gets under your skin, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me, would you have stayed for the premiere? Would you have stayed for the premiere? Let's roll film. In Bodie, California, the silence of the dead is only broken by the wind, and if you listen closely enough, on certain nights, the ghostly applause from the abandoned seats of the Bodie Bijou. That's what the faded century-old tourist pamphlets claimed anyway. As I, Leo Maxwell, stood before the weathered facade of the cinema, its paint peeling like sunburned skin, the only applause I heard was the furious tattoo of my own heart against my ribs. This wasn't just a job. It was an exile. A self-imposed banishment to the literal ghost town. A desperate attempt to outrun the phantom reels of my father's calamitous, unfinished final film that played on a loop in my own head. My father, a name once whispered with indie reverence, now a byword for obsessive genius gone tragically awry. He'd poured everything into that last project, a haunting, experimental piece about, well, I never truly understood it, and my failure to understand, to support, clang in the desolate quiet of my current existence, like a dropped film canister. The keys to the Bijou, and my 6-month contract as its nocturnal caretaker and preservation assistant, had been handed over by a lawyer in Bridgeport, the nearest settlement still clinging to life. The owner, a Mr. Caspian Thorne, was apparently an elderly recluse, too frail to manage the property himself. His instructions, however, were to be relayed by his grandnephew and heir apparent, a young man named Elias Thorne, who I was told had grand, modern visions for Bodie's last picture show. Elias Thorne arrived in a cloud of Bodie's ubiquitous dust, driving a restored vintage convertible that seemed offensively vibrant against the muted, decaying backdrop of the ghost town. He was perhaps my age, late 20s, with an easy, practiced charm, designer stubble, and an expensive camera slung over his shoulder. He introduced himself with a handshake that was a little too firm, a smile a little too bright. Leo Maxwell, right? Welcome to the mausoleum of celluloid, he greeted me, his voice a little too loud for Bodie's profound silence. Uncle Caspian census, regards, and his rather quaint list of house rules. The old man's a bit of a sentimentalist, bless his cotton socks. He gestured vaguely towards the Bijou. She's a relic, this old girl. But I've got plans, big plans, documentaries, immersive experiences. We're going to make Bodie's ghosts famous. His enthusiasm felt invasive. Before he launched into the quaint rules, a dusty pickup truck rumbled to a stop nearby. A young woman hopped out, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. Weariness, perhaps. Sadie Monroe, right on time. Elias said, hint of condescension in his tone. A hint of condescension in his tone. Sadie's our local history buff. Helps Uncle Caspian with archiving. She'll show you the anachronistic ropes a bit tomorrow, Leo, before she heads back to Bridgeport. Sadie offered me a small, polite smile. Her eyes, though, were sharp and appraising as they took in Elias, then me. There was an immediate unspoken tension between her and Elias that piqued my interest. It's a unique place, Mr. Maxwell, she said, her voice soft but clear. She said, her voice soft but clear. Deserves respect. The last word seemed aimed more at Elias than at me. Elias waved a dismissive hand. Right, respect for the cobwebs. Now the rules, a direct edict from the crypt keeper himself, Uncle Caspian. He pulled a theatrically yellowed envelope from his pocket. He's not a crypt keeper, Elias. Sadie interjected quietly, a surprising firmness in her voice. He's trying to preserve something. Elias merely smirked, then cleared his throat. Rule the first, and this one's a corker. Should you discover old, tarnished coinage within the cupholders of the auditorium seating, a common occurrence apparently, you are to leave them undisturbed. They are considered gratuities for the original patrons. He winked. Spooky. Huh? Free money, and we can't even touch it. My unease, already simmering from my father's ghostly reels, intensified. Original patrons? In Bodie? Rule a second. Elias continued, clearly enjoying himself. Under no circumstances are you to react or respond. Should you hear the faint strains of old-timey pianoforte music emanating from behind the main cinema screen, particularly after midnight, it is merely the building settling. He snorted. A rather musical settling, I'd say. Sadie was looking at Elias with an expression I could only describe as profound disapproval, mixed with a sliver of fear. And finally, rule the third, my personal favorite for its sheer B-movie ridiculousness, Elias announced with a flourish. If a figure, often described as dusty and attired in 19th century clothing, should inquire as to whether the picture show is about to commence, you are to politely inform them. Not tonight, I'm afraid. They will then, apparently, vanish. No autograph, sadly. He folded the paper with a flourish. So, Leo, there you have it. The Body Bijou Survival Guide. Utterly bonkers. The lot of it. Personally, I think it's all just local folklore, embroidered by an old man's failing memory. But his eyes glinted with a sudden, sharp avarice. It makes for one hell of a story, doesn't it? And I intend to capture every last spectral sigh on camera. He then gave me a cursory tour of the RAP, the dusty lobby with its faded velvet ropes, the main auditorium smelling of mildew and forgotten popcorn, the surprisingly well-maintained, if ancient, projection booth. The air everywhere was heavy still, carrying that faint, unplaceable scent of old perfume and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like diluted blood. As Elias was outlining my duties, mostly sweeping, dusting, and ensuring the ancient generator didn't conk out, he paused by a particular row of seats in the back. Uncle Caspian always said this was the Whispering Row, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. Claimed the original. My first thought was how to make it available once I have finished my shooting. It will be a truly unique experience for my customers in the future, you know. My gaze drifted to one of the cup holders in that row. My breath caught, lying nestled in the dust, was a single, dark, tarnished silver dollar. Its date almost unreadable, but clearly from another century. Elias, following my gaze, chuckled. See, prime material. This is going to be gold. Leo, pure, paranormal gold. He clapped me on the shoulder, his enthusiasm jarring in the tomb-like silence. Don't let the ghost bite, eh? Or the rules. They're mostly for show anyway. I'll be back in a few days with my crew. Try not to stir up too much dust. Or too many spirits. Before then, he departed as brashly as he'd arrived, leaving me alone in the cavernous silent cinema with Sadie, who was now looking at the tarnished coin with an expression of troubled solemnity. He doesn't understand, she murmured, almost to herself, her earlier defiance towards Elias replaced by a quiet concern. He thinks it's a game, a story to be exploited. She looked at me, her eyes searching. Mr. Thorne, The older Mr. Thorne. He put those rules in place for a reason, Mr. Maxwell. They aren't just quaint suggestions. They're anchors. Anchors. Against what? I didn't dare ask. The weight of my father's failures, the oppressive silence of Bodie, and the chilling absurdity of Elias Thorne's rules settled upon me like the dust that coated every surface of the body bijou. The first reel of my own body horror show had begun to turn. The body bijou, once Elias Thorne's offensively vibrant convertible, had vanished in a cloud of historic dust, settled into a silence that was profound and unsettling. My first few nights were spent in a state of hyper-awareness. Every creak of the ancient building, every sigh of the wind through the broken panes of glass, sending jolts of adrenaline through me. The air, thick with the scent of decaying velvet and something else, that faint, sweet metallic tang I couldn't quite place, seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. My father's ghostly film reels played relentlessly in my mind, often intercut with the image of that single, tarnished silver dollar in the Whispering Row. Sadie Monroe returned the next afternoon, as promised, ostensibly to help me archive a stack of decaying film posters Mr. Caspian Thorne wanted preserved. In reality, I think she came to see how the new lamb was faring in the slaughterhouse. Her presence was a welcome, if slightly cautious, intrusion into the bijou's oppressive solitude. He really means it, doesn't he? I asked, gesturing vaguely at the eerie auditorium as we sorted through brittle, water-stained posters, depicting long-forgotten silent film stars. Elias. About turning this place into some kind of paranormal reality show. Sadie sighed, her brow furrowing as she carefully unrolled a poster for a film called The Phantom of the Silver Lode. Elias sees Bodie as a brand, Mr. Maxwell. Not a resting place. His uncle, Caspian. He understands the quiet. Elias just wants to make it scream. Her empathy for the elder Thorne and her disdain for the younger was palpable. It forged an immediate, unspoken bond between us. We found ourselves talking, really talking, not just about the bijou, but about Bodie's poignant history, its resilient ghosts, and, more hesitantly, about our own separate burdens. My father's spectral legacy, her own quiet struggle to reconcile, her love for history with the encroaching, often disrespectful, tide of modern tourism. It was during a routine sweep of the auditorium later that week, after Sadie had returned to Bridgeport, that the first rule truly asserted its presence. I found them. Not just one, but 3 tarnished silver coins, a Morgan dollar, a seated Liberty quarter, and a large, heavy trade dollar, nestled in the cup holders of 3 separate seats in the Whispering Row. They hadn't been there the day before. A prickle of icy dread traced its way down my spine. Leave them. For the original patrons. My instinct was to scoop them up, a historian's curiosity battling a rising tide of unease. But Sadie's quiet warning about Elias, and Mr. Caspian Thorne's solemn intonation of the rules, stayed my hand. As I backed away from the row, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement in the deep shadows at the end of the aisle, a darker shape against the darkness, accompanied by the faintest whisper, like dry silk rustling. Elias returned a few days later, not with a film crew as he'd threatened, but alone, his expensive camera already out, his eyes gleaming with an almost manic energy. He'd heard from a source, probably one of the few park rangers who tolerated his presence, that I'd mentioned finding more coins. Excellent. Primary evidence, he declared, striding into the auditorium. He made a beeline for the Whispering Row, ignoring my hesitant protests. These are magnificent. Look at the patina. Imagine the stories these could tell, eh, Leo? He scooped them up without a second thought, turning them over in his palm, his camera clicking. Elias, your uncle specifically said to leave them, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He just laughed. Superstitious nonsense, my dear fellow. These are historical artifacts. And damn good props. He'd pocketed them. Now, about that piano music. The change was subtle at first. A deeper chill in the auditorium. The scent of lilies. And that metallic sweetness, previously faint, now seemed to cling to the air with a new tenacity. Later that night, long after Elias had departed, chattering about sound equipment and night vision lenses, I heard a new sound. A soft, almost mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the empty seats themselves. A collective exhalation of disappointment? Or perhaps a growing impatience. I found myself glancing towards the whispering row more often, half expecting to see its spectral occupants. Sadie, when I relayed Elias's actions to her over a crackling phone line, was audibly distressed. He shouldn't have done that, Leo. The old stories, they talk about the coins as a pact, a token of respect. Taking them is like stealing from the dead. They won't like it. She told me of a tattered diary she'd found in the Bridgeport Historical Society, written by a projectionist at the Bijou in the early 1900s. It described how, when certain patrons were disrespected, their favored seats taken, their offerings disturbed, the theater would grow cold and unwelcoming. And sometimes, the phantom piano player would refuse to play his on-track music, plunging the spectral showings into an unnerving silence. Or worse, Sadie added, her voice a worried whisper. He'd play something else entirely, something to call others. The something else Sadie had warned about didn't take long to manifest. A few nights after Elias' coin-ransacking visit, I was in the projection booth, a cramped, dusty space that still smelled faintly of nitrate film and old machinery. It was past midnight. The wind outside had picked up, a low, mournful howl that seemed to harmonize with the groans of the aging building. Then, I heard it. The piano. It wasn't the faint, almost ethereal music I'd been half expecting. The kind Mr. Caspian Thorne's rule had alluded to. This was different. It was louder, more insistent, emanating clearly from behind the massive stained cinema screen. The melody was still old-timey, a ragtime piece. But it was played with a frenetic, almost desperate energy, as if the pianist were trying to convey an urgent message, or perhaps struggling against some unseen restraint. There were discordant notes, jarring anachronisms woven into the familiar tune, like a cry for help embedded in a lullaby. Do not respond if you hear faint, old-timey piano music. But this wasn't faint, and it didn't feel like the building settling. It felt alive, and deeply, profoundly distressed. My father had been a passable pianist. He used to say that music was the purest form of emotional expression, capable of conveying what words never could. Standing there, in the oppressive silence of the Bijou, broken only by that frantic, ghostly ragtime, I felt an almost overwhelming empathic pull, a desperate urge to understand, to respond, to shout out, I hear you. What's wrong? The music grew more agitated, the tempo increasing, the notes tumbling over each other in a cascade of sorrowful urgency. Then, abruptly, it stopped, mid-phrase, leaving a silence more terrifying than the music itself. And in that silence, I saw it, or thought I saw it. For a fleeting instant, projected onto the dusty, lifeless screen, was an image, not from any film I recognized. It was a wavering black and white tableau. A man in old-fashioned clothes, his face obscured by shadow, slumped over a piano, his hands chained to the keyboard. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving only the stained canvas. Shaken, I retreated from the projection booth. My attempts to rationalize what I was experiencing were becoming increasingly futile. This wasn't just a haunted theater. It was a place with a story, a tragedy, desperately trying to be told. Elias returned the following week, brimming with his usual infuriating self-assurance. This time, accompanied by a sound engineer, a nervous young man named Ben, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elias had set up sophisticated recording equipment, determined to capture the bijou's unique acoustics. Heard anything interesting, Leo? Elias asked, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Any midnight concertos from our resident phantom? I hesitated, then, against my better judgment, described the frantic music. The chained pianist I thought I'd seen. I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that it might make him reconsider to proceed with more caution. Chains? Brilliant. Thematic gold. We need to amplify it, Leo. Get a clear recording. Maybe even try to communicate. He gestured to Ben. Set up the parabolic mic behind the screen. Let's see if we can get our Spectral Chopin to talk. Sadie, who had arrived with some historical maps Elias had inexplicably requested, overheard. Elias, no, she pleaded, her voice tight with genuine fear. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The stories say the music is a lure or a warning. Trying to interact with it directly, it's like inviting the darkness in. She showed him a small, leather-bound account book she'd unearthed, belonging to the bijou's first owner from the 1890s. Several pages detailed unusual expenditures for containment rituals and appeasement offerings to the entity behind the silver screen. Elias merely scoffed. Folklore and fireside tales, my dear Sadie. We're making a 21st century documentary, not appeasing Victorian spooks. He turned to Ben. Let's try a little provocation. Play back some of those old player piano rolls we found in the basement. See if we can get a call and response. Despite our increasingly desperate protests, Elias proceeded. Ben, looking thoroughly miserable, activated a playback of a jaunty, if tinny, piano tune from a bygone era. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from behind the screen, came a response. It was no longer the frantic ragtime. It was a single, low, resonant chord, sustained and mournful, filled with an immeasurable sadness and a chilling, nascent anger. The lights in the bijou flickered. The temperature dropped, and on the screen, for a horrifying, lingering moment, appeared a pair of burning, accusatory eyes, staring directly out at us. Then, darkness, and a silence that felt, somehow, like a promise of retribution. Elias, for the first time, looked a little less sure of himself. Ben looked ready to bolt. Sadie and I exchanged a look of shared, deepening dread. The atmosphere in the Bodie bijou after Elias's provocation was palpably different. The audience of shadows became more restless, their fleeting appearances more frequent, their forms more distinct. I'd catch glimpses of them in the periphery, dusty figures in 19th century attire, their faces pale and indistinct, their spectral gazes fixed on the empty screen with a silent, sorrowful V.N. John. The air was perpetually cold, and the faint scent of lilies and old blood seemed to follow me everywhere. The third rule was tested on a night when Bodie was enveloped in an UN seasonal freezing fog, visibility reduced to mere feet. I was doing my final security check, the beam of my flashlight cutting a nervous swathe through the oppressive darkness of the lobby. Suddenly, a figure materialized directly in my path, coalescing from the swirling mist and shadows like a half-forgotten daguerreotype. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, her dress a cascade of dusty, decaying lace, a plumed hat askew on her spectral head. Her face was a pale oval, her eyes dark, sorrowful pools. "Young man," she rasped, her voice like the rustle of brittle silk, 100 years of dust in her diction. "Is the picture show about to commence?" "I fear I am tardy." My heart leaped into my throat. "Tell them, not tonight." Mr. Caspian Thorne's precise, emotionless instruction. I'm afraid not tonight, ma'am," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The reels are damaged. It was the first excuse that came to mind. The spectral woman sighed, a sound like the wind through a broken window pane. A flicker of profound, eternal disappointment crossed her pale features. Ah, she breathed. Another night, then, perhaps, and as quickly as she had appeared, she began to dissolve, her form becoming translucent, then vanishing completely into the fog-choked shadows, leaving behind only a faint scent of lavender and a chilling cold spot. I stood there for a long moment, my flashlight beam trembling, the silence of the bijou pressing in on me. Elias, far from being deterred by the increasingly hostile atmosphere, became more obsessed. He saw every manifestation as a personal triumph, a confirmation of his impending fame. He now spent most of his nights at the bijou, wiring the place with cameras and microphones, his earlier charm completely eclipsed by a driven, almost feverish intensity. He dismissed my and Sadie's warnings as Luddite fear-mongering. "This is groundbreaking, Leo," he'd exclaim, reviewing grainy footage of a fleeting shadow or a distorted audio recording of a faint whisper. "We're on the verge of proving everything. Think of the subscribers, the series deals." Sadie and I found ourselves unlikely co-conspirators, our shared concern for the bijou, and perhaps for Elias's very sanity, drawing us closer. We spent hours in the Bridgeport Historical Society, poring over brittle newspapers and forgotten town records, searching for any clue, any key to understanding the true nature of the bijou's haunting, and a way to stop Elias before he unleashed something truly catastrophic. We discovered that the bijou hadn't just been a cinema. In its earliest days, before motion pictures, it had been a spirit VNA, a place where a charismatic and ultimately disgraced spiritualist named Professor Alistair Grimaldi, a stage name no doubt, had conducted elaborate seances, promising audiences a glimpse behind the veil. Grimaldi, the record suggested, had a particular fascination with capturing and projecting ectoplasmic manifestations, and had boasted of a cinematic seance machine that could make spirits visible to the naked eye. He vanished under a cloud of scandal and accusations of fraud, but not before several of his most devoted patrons also disappeared without a trace. "The Projectionist," Sadie breathed, looking up from a faded playbill advertising Grimaldi's phantasmagoria. It wasn't a film projectionist they were talking about. It was him, Grimaldi. The pieces were falling into place, forming a terrifying picture. Mr. Caspian Thorne's rules weren't just quaint traditions. They were a carefully constructed protocol to manage, to appease, a complex and potentially malevolent ecosystem of trapped spirits, all orchestrated by the spectral showman, Grimaldi, aka the Projectionist. The coins were their admission, the piano music was his call, or perhaps his lament, and the picture show they eternally awaited was his spectral phantasmagoria. Elias, in his blind ambition, was not just observing. He was actively dismantling this fragile, dangerous equilibrium. He was trying to force a performance, to drag the unwilling spirits into his own crass, modern spotlight. The mini-hook that cemented our fears came when Elias, in a fit of frustration at not capturing clearer apparitions, found an old, a bit too fancy hand-cranked film projector in a boarded-up storage room beneath the stage. A room that reeked overpoweringly of lilies and that sweet metallic tang. With it was a single, unlabeled film canister, its metal surprisingly untarnished. "This is it," Elias crowed, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement. "Grimaldi's original spirit film. This will be the centerpiece of my documentary. We're going to have a premiere, Leo, a genuine Bodie bijou ghost premiere." He ignored our horrified protests, our pleas for caution. He was beyond reason, lost in his vision of spectral stardom. The curtain, it seemed, was about to rise on a show none of us had bought a ticket for, and one from which there might be no escape. Elias Thorne, deaf to our increasingly frantic warnings, became a man possessed. The discovery of Grimaldi's spirit film and the antique hand-crank projector consumed him. He spent days shut away in the projection booth, tinkering with the ancient machinery, his face illuminated by the flickering glow of his laptop as he researched early film preservation techniques, a manic energy thrumming beneath his usual veneer of charm. The air in the bijou grew heavier with each passing hour, the silence thick with an almost unbearable anticipation, as if the very walls were holding their breath. "Tonight's the night, Leo, Sadie," Elias announced, his eyes unnaturally bright, dark circles beneath them testament to his sleepless obsession. The world premiere of Professor Alistair Grimaldi's Phantasmagoria, or at least its first screening in over a century. "I've jury-rigged the old projector. The film stock is delicate, but I think it'll hold." He gestured dramatically towards the auditorium. "Our Spectral audience awaits their long-overdue encore." He had, against all reason, decided to stage this premiere. He dragged several of the dusty, tarnished coins he'd previously pocketed for authenticity, he'd claimed, and placed them back in the cup holders of the Whispering Row, a perverse offering to the entities he sought to exploit. He'd even set up his own cameras throughout the auditorium, their little red recording lights like malevolent, unblinking eyes in the gloom. "Elias, this is insane," Sadie pleaded, her voice tight with fear. "We had tried everything. Appeals to reason, warnings based on our research into Grimaldi's dark history, and the disappearances of his patrons. Even a desperate, failed attempt to contact Mr. Caspian Thorne. Nothing had penetrated Elias' self-aggrandizing delusion. You don't know what that film will show, what it might do. That's the beauty of it, my dear Sadie. The mystery, the raw, unadulterated paranormal experience." He grinned, a rictus of excitement. "This isn't just a documentary anymore. It's performance art, and our original patrons are the stars." As dusk settled over Bodie, casting long skeletal shadows across the ghost town, Elias insisted we take our seats in the auditorium. "Front row for the spectacle," he'd said with a chilling wink. The air was ice cold, the scent of lilies, and that old metallic blood tang almost overpowering. The silence was absolute, save for the frantic thumping of my own heart. From the projection booth, a beam of unsteady light, weak and flickering, cut through the darkness, hitting the ancient stained screen. The whirring, clicking sound of the hand-cranked projector echoed through the cavernous space, a sound out of time. And then, images began to appear, grainy, indistinct, and deeply unsettling. The phantasmagoria began. It was a chaotic, nightmarish assemblage of swirling ectoplasmic forms, distorted faces frozen in silent screams, and shadowy figures contorting in unnatural poses, all set against a backdrop that looked disturbingly like the interior of the bijou itself, but subtly wrong, as if seen through a fever dream. There was no discernible narrative, only a growing sense of unease, of peering into a place where sanity had frayed and a malevolent intelligence held sway. And then the piano music began. Not the mournful, pleading arias I'd heard before, but a jarring, triumphant, almost martial dirge, seeming to emanate from behind the screen itself, a live accompaniment to the horrors unfolding. It was the sound of the projectionist, Grimaldi, in his element, his spectral performance finally horrifyingly restored. As the unholy film flickered on, the audience of shadows began to arrive, one by one. Then in a silent, rustling cheiduan, they materialized in the dusty seats around us, no longer faint, peripheral glimpses, but more substantial, their forms clearer, their period clothing distinct, their pale, sorrowful faces turned raptly towards the screen. There was no applause, no sound from them, only an intense, unnerving focus, an eternal hunger for the show. They were no longer just echoes. They felt present, and their collective gaze, their silent, expectant energy, was terrifying. Suddenly, one of the spectral figures in the whispering row, a gaunt man in a miner's battered hat, slowly turned his head. His eyes, dark, empty sockets, fixed on Elias, who was filming everything with a trembling, ecstatic grin. The figure raised a translucent, skeletal hand and pointed directly at him. He took our admission. The unspoken accusation hung in the frigid air. The music behind the screen swelled, the triumphant dirge becoming something more predatory, more demanding. The images on screen grew more grotesque, more active, the swirling forms seeming to writhe and reach out from the confines of the flickering celluloid. "Isn't it magnificent?" Elias breathed, oblivious, or perhaps reveling in the rising tide of dread. Then, the screen itself began to ripple, to bulge, as if something behind it, something immense and formless, was pressing against the ancient canvas, trying to break through. The projected images distorted, morphing into a single, colossal, shadowy silhouette that vaguely resembled the chained pianist I had glimpsed before, but now unbound, powerful, and radiating an almost palpable malevolence. This was the Projectionist in his true, unrestrained form. The audience of shadows stirred, a collective sigh rippling through their ranks, a sound like 1,000 dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor. They began to rise, not threateningly, but as if drawn by an irresistible force, their gaze fixed on the bulging screen, on the monstrous silhouette of their spectral master of ceremonies. "Elias, stop the projector!" I yelled, my voice hoarse with terror. "You're not just showing them a film. You're feeding him. You're giving him an audience, giving him power." "Nonsense," Elias snapped, though a flicker of fear finally entered his eyes as a long, shadowy tendril seemed to snake out from the screen, questing blindly into the auditorium. This is the climax." The tendril solidified, becoming a grotesque, ectoplasmic arm that swept across the seats, narrowly missing Sadie, who screamed and stumbled back. The audience of shadows didn't flinch. They seemed to welcome it, to lean into its path. One spectral woman, the one I had encountered in the lobby, reached out a translucent hand towards the encroaching appendage, her face alight with a terrifying, blissful smile. This wasn't a show. It was a summoning, a harvest. "Leo, we have to do something," Sadie cried, grabbing my arm, her face a mask of terror. "He's going to get us all trapped in his goddamn movie." Her words, "trapped in his movie," struck a chord, igniting a desperate idea, my father's unfinished film. It had been about the power of cinema to create realities, to trap or liberate souls. He'd been obsessed with early cinematic techniques, with the very mechanics of illusion. The projector, Grimaldi's projector. It was showing his reality. What if we could show it? Something else. Something to break the spell, to sever the connection. The projection booth. I yelled to Sadie, pulling her towards the back of the auditorium. "We need to change the reel, if we can." Elias, finally realizing the horrific reality of what he'd unleashed, was now fumbling with his own camera. His earlier bravado replaced by a gibbering white-faced terror as the shadowy tendrils from the screen multiplied, sweeping through this auditorium like the arms of some colossal, unseen kraken. And the audience of shadows was now fully risen, moving slowly, inexorably, not towards us, but towards the screen, towards the projectionist, their forms becoming more solid, their faces alight with an unholy rapture, as if about to merge with his grotesque masterpiece. The air thrummed with power, the piano music a deafening, triumphant cacophony. The cinema was no longer just a haunted space. It had become a nexus, a gateway, and Elias Thorne, in his arrogance and ambition, had just thrown it wide open. The premiere of madness was in full swing, and the price of admission, I feared, was our very souls. The booth. Sadie. The original reels. The ones from before Grimaldi. I yelled over the deafening, triumphant cacophony of the Projectionist's spectral piano and the rustling, sighing advance of the audience of shadows. My mind, reeling from the immediate horror, clung to a desperate, half-formed idea rooted in my father's obsessive theories about cinema's power over perception, over reality itself. If Grimaldi's film was a conduit for his nightmare, perhaps an older, simpler narrative could disrupt it, could introduce a discordant note into his spectral symphony. Sadie, her face etched with terror, but her eyes fiercely determined, nodded. She knew the archives better than anyone. Together, we scrambled from our seats, narrowly evading a caressing, shadowy tendril that snaked out from the screen, and lunged for the nearest exit out of the main auditorium, which hopefully led towards the back access stairs to the projection booth. Elias Thorne was a lost cause. He was cowering near his tripod, his expensive camera clattering to the floor, his earlier bravado replaced by a child's helpless, mewling terror as the spectral audience flowed around him, their forms becoming more tangible, their dusty garments brushing against him. They weren't an audience anymore. They were participants, being drawn into the monstrous living tableau that the screen had become. The silhouette of the projectionist loomed larger, more defined, its shadowy arms reaching, beckoning. The journey to the projection booth was a nightmarish obstacle course. The bijou itself seemed to have come alive, an extension of Grimaldi's malevolent will. Doors slammed shut in our faces, unseen hands tugged at our clothes, and the air throbbed with the projectionist's overwhelming psychic pressure, pressing down on us, trying to crush our resolve. The whispers of the audience were everywhere, a chorus of sibilant invitations to join the picture. Stay for the final reel, the nitrate vault, in the sub-basement, beneath the original ticket booth, Sadie gasped, pulling me down a narrow, dark service corridor I hadn't known existed. Mr. Caspian. He showed me once, films even older than Grimaldi's, from the very first days, simple town scenes, everyday life in Bodie, before the tornado darkness settled here. It was a long shot, a desperate hope. If Grimaldi's film was a complex, manipulative spell, perhaps the sheer, unadorned reality of those earliest, most innocent moving images could act as an antidote, a grounding force. The sub-basement was an archive of forgotten dreams, rank with the smell of decaying nitrate and a profound, ancient cold. Row upon row of tarnished film canisters lined the damp stone walls. Sadie, her historian's instinct overriding her fear, moved with a frantic, focused energy, her fingers flying across the faded labels. "This one," she cried, pulling down a heavy, lead-lined canister. "Bodie, A Sunny Afternoon, 1888. Simple scenes of Main Street. No story, just life." Back in the projection booth, the scene below was apocalyptic. The screen was no longer a screen, but a swirling vortex of shadow and distorted light, from which the projectionist's monstrous form was now almost fully emergent, his shadowy tendrils like the writhing limbs of some deep-sea horror. The audience of shadows were at the very edge of the stage, their forms beginning to shimmer and merge with the vortex. Elias was on his knees, babbling incoherently, his face a mask of utter, soul-shattering terror. The antique hand-cranked projector was still whirring, Grimaldi's nightmare reel still turning. With fumbling, desperate hands, I unthreaded the phantasmagoria. The images on the screen vanished, plunging the auditorium into an even deeper, more terrifying darkness. The only light now the sickly internal glow of the vortex itself. The Projectionist let out a silent, psychic roar of fury, a wave of pure malevolence that made my teeth ache. Sadie, her face grim, threaded the sunny afternoon reel onto the projector. "Crank, Leo. Crank like your life depends on it," she yelled. "It's our only shot." I grasped the cold metal handle and began to turn, the old mechanism groaning in protest. For a moment, nothing. Then, a flickering, hesitant light, and on the screen, cutting through the swirling darkness of the vortex, appeared an image. Bodie's Main Street, bathed in the harsh, clear light of a forgotten 19th century afternoon. Mules, pulling ore wagons, meaning derby hats, and women in long skirts bustling along wooden sidewalks. Children playing a dusty game of tag. Life, ordinary, sun-drenched, unapologetically real life. The effect on the Projectionist and his spectral audience was instantaneous and devastating. The triumphant, malevolent piano music faltered, replaced by a discordant shrieking, as if the simple, honest images were anathema to their shadowy existence. The vortex recoiled, the shadowy tendrils shrinking back as if burned. The audience of shadows caught between the allure of Grimaldi's nightmare and the stark, unwelcome reality of a world they had long since departed began to waver, their forms flickering, their ecstatic expressions contorting into looks of awe, confusion, then anguish. "Keep going," Sadie urged, her eyes fixed on the screen, on the battle of light and shadow playing out before us. I cranked faster. The images of old Bodie, a blacksmith at his forge, a woman hanging laundry, a dog chasing a tumbleweed, flooding the screen. A relentless assertion of mundane existence against the phantasmagoric horror. The Projectionist shrieked again, a sound that was both 1,000 whispers and a single piercing cry of rage and pain. Its form began to unravel, the shadows that comprised it dissolving, retreating back into the depths of the screen, which was now, blessedly, just a screen again, albeit one showing a very old, very scratched film. The audience of shadows, their connection to their spectral master severed, their eternal picture show abruptly cancelled, let out a collective mournful sigh, a sound like the wind dying in the eaves. One by one, they began to fade, not vanishing instantly as the single patron had done before, but slowly dissolving, like old photographs exposed to too much light, until only the dusty, empty seats remained. Elias Thorne was still on his knees, but his babbling had stopped. He was staring at the flickering images of old Bodie, tears streaming down his face, a single broken sob escaping his lips. Whether it was a sob of relief or of a mind finally irrevocably shattered, I couldn't tell. The last image of Bodie, a sunny afternoon, faded from the screen. The projector whirred to a halt. The silence that fell then was not the oppressive, waiting silence of before. It was a tired silence, an empty silence, the silence of a final fade out. The dawn that broke over Bodie the next morning felt like the first true dawn in over a century. The air, usually thick with an unseen miasma, was crisp and clean, carrying only the scent of sagebrush and the high desert wind. The Bodie bijou stood silent and still, its faded facade looking, for the first time since I'd arrived, simply like an old, abandoned building, not a vessel of contained malevolence. Elias Thorne was a broken man. The park rangers, alerted by a series of frantic, incoherent calls Sadie had managed to make once the worst was over, found him wandering the dusty streets of Bodie, clutching his damaged camera, muttering about bad light and ruin takes, he was gently escorted to Bridgeport, and from there to a facility where it was hoped he might eventually distinguish real life. The paranormal gold he had sought had proven to be a fool's alchemy. Mr. Caspian Thorne, when finally reached, listened to a heavily edited, carefully curated version of the night's events with a profound, weary sigh. He offered no recriminations, only a quiet, "The bijou. It demands a certain respect for its narrative." Elias regrettably tried to write his own script. He arranged for the RTP to be boarded up indefinitely. Its show, he said, was finally, truly over. Sadie and I were left to pick up the pieces, both literal and metaphorical. We gave vague statements to the Rangers about a disturbed trespasser, Elias, and a freak electrical storm that had caused power surges and unusual atmospheric effects in the old cinema. They didn't press too hard. Bodie, it seemed, was accustomed to its share of unexplained phenomena and eccentric visitors. The experience forged an unbreakable bond between Sadie and me. We had faced down a darkness that defied easy definition and somehow survived. In the quiet weeks that followed, as Bodie settled back into its ghostly slumber, we found ourselves spending more time together, not just sifting through historical records, but talking, sharing, processing. The shared trauma became a foundation for a hesitant, fragile friendship. I never saw the audience of shadows again. The coins in the cup holders, those I had found, and those Elias had briefly purloined, were gone when I made one last, cautious inspection of the Whispering Row. Perhaps with their projectionist silenced and his eternal picture show cancelled, they had finally found their own fade to black. Yet the bijou and Bodie left an indelible mark. I couldn't return to the cynical world of film criticism. Not in the same way. My father's last, unfinished film no longer haunted me with the same intensity. Instead, I felt a strange, sorrowful kinship with its fragmented, misunderstood vision. He had been trying to capture something about the ethereal, transformative power of the moving image. A power I had now witnessed in its most terrifying, and ultimately, its most redemptive form. Sometimes when I watch a very old film, particularly a silent one, I feel a familiar chill, a faint echo of that metallic, sweet scent. I see the flicker of an unseen projector, hear the faintest strains of a ghostly piano, and I remember the rules of the body bijou. They weren't just quaint superstitions. They were the frayed, desperate threads holding back a tide of forgotten sorrows, of an audience that never wanted the show to end. Elias's footage, or what little was recovered from his damaged camera, was deemed unusable, a chaotic mess of distorted images and corrupted audio. But an urban legend began to circulate online months later. A short, heavily pixelated, and deeply unsettling clip, allegedly leaked from an anonymous source, titled simply Body Premiere .m4. It showed nothing clearly, only swirling shadows, distorted faces, and the sound of frantic, discordant piano music. Those who watched it reported vivid nightmares, a lingering sense of unease, and sometimes the distinct feeling of being watched by unseen eyes in dark, empty rooms. Elias, in his madness, may have inadvertently created his masterpiece after all, a new kind of spirit film, not captured on celluloid, but imprinted on the fragile psyche of anyone who dared to watch. The ultimate viral horror, the show, it seemed, always found a way to go on, in one form or another. And Bodie, in its silent, dusty majesty, kept its secrets, waiting for the next unwary soul to seek a story within its haunted frames, a new audience for its after-credits silence. That was... I work night shift at a haunted movie theater in Bodie. We have 3 strange rules to survive. Now ask yourself, if someone asked you whether the picture show was about to begin, would you know how to answer? Some theaters project more than just light. Some films aren't meant to be watched. And some rules exist to keep the screen from watching you back. If you're still here, you survived. This time. But the Bijou waits. Its screen is still intact, and legends say a certain reel was never destroyed. If you enjoyed this descent into madness, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Leave a comment if you've ever walked into a cinema and felt like something was already watching from the dark. And whatever you do, don't take the coins. Don't listen to the piano. And if someone in 19th century clothing asks about the show, tell them, not tonight. Fade to black.